Hello everyone, welcome to MTGology, and this is going to be a segment that I'm doing from now on called Decknology. Can do these every once in a while, just deck techs on cool decks that are out there. If I see any, usually it's going to be in standard. If I see anything cool, any new unique decks that are in other formats, then I'll probably bring those in too. But just to start it off, we're going to be doing just kind of the classic Golgari Aggros in standard right now. It's a little bit of a monster in the format. It's the most popular deck according to MTG Top 8. And I see it a lot on Arena and in stores. So we're just going to be doing a quick deck tech to talk about what this deck is about in case you don't know. And let's get to it. So to start off, we got the land base. There's 23 lands with about 12 basic lands, 7 forests, 5 swamps. This does have 2 other black lands that you'll see in a minute, Memorial to Folly, which evens it out. But you do need a little bit more on the green side, even though it's pretty much a 50-50 split between the black and the green throughout the deck, just because all your 1 and 2 drops are green. And so in order to be able to play those cards in the early game, you don't want to be getting stuck with all swamps. But in the standard format, we do have plenty of land fixing with 4 overgrown tombs and 4 woodland cemeteries, which is nice. So just being able to play that overgrown tomb tapped on turn 1 if you don't have your Llanowar Elves, and just woodland cemetery on turn 2, and you're set for the rest of the game. It doesn't even matter what lands you have because nothing costs more than 2 of the same color. Moving on to some of these other lands, you got 1 detection tower. It's really for the mirror match against other opponents with Carnage Tyrants. Since it's just a 2-color deck and there's nothing that costs more than 2 of the same, is pretty convenient, and it's pretty easy to just be able to throw in this 1 colorless land. You got your Memorial to Folly. You only have one drop in the entire deck, so throwing these in there, not a huge issue. If you don't have your 1 drop in your hand, you can throw this down or throw in your Shockland tapped. And, being able to have that just like extra effect of sacrificing it to return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. So if someone did, board wipe your Carnage Tyrant, being able to just grab it back with that just makes it so much harder for your opponent to come back. Moving on to your creatures, the first creatures you're playing are your Llanowar Elves, the only 1 drop in the deck typically. Definitely play 4 of those just so you can get your 3 drops on turn 2 a little easier, a little bit of mana fixing. Not super necessary, but if you have them, obviously it's convenient to be able to play, like 3 drop on turn 2, 2 drops on turn 4. Especially with those Wild Growth Walkers, those are incredibly important to get down. You got your Merfolk Branch Walker, which kind of symbolizes what this deck really is about. There's a lot of exploring cards, and you got your Wild Growth Walker, which is incredibly important, which every single time you explore, you get a +1/+1 counter on it, and you gain 3 life. Also a note, usually a deck like this, you'd expect it to be playing 24, 25 lands, but since the whole deck is about exploring and you have access to Llanowar Elves, you're going to be able to dig through your deck really easily to find those lands, and every time you explore into a land, it goes straight into your hand. So you don't really have to play 24 lands if you don't want to. Moving on to 3 and 4 drops, or 3 and up, I should say, for your creatures. You got Midnight Reaper as a 3 of. This card is incredibly powerful in that if you're playing against really any deck, that now 1-for-1 trades are completely sided into your favor. Just every single time a creature you control dies that's not a token, you're going to take 1 damage and draw a card. The only downside I see to this is it's not a May, so if you're playing against like Mono Red or other really aggressive decks, then that could be an issue where they're already dealing tons of damage to you, and now they can just force you to take more damage by like lightning striking your creatures, and now it's kind of a bonus. But typically it's going to be a huge bonus for you to have that on the battlefield, and that's kind of why I play only 3 instead of 4, is just because you don't want to be killing yourself with it. You got 4 Jade Light Rangers, just extremely powerful card. The fact that it explores twice, so you get 2 looks at the top of your deck. If it's something you want, it gets 2 +1/+1 counters. If you get 2 lands on top of your deck, gets those right out of the way, right into your hand, and then closer to the cards you really want. 2 Ravenous Chupacabras, basically just murder with legs. You get a creature, usually not like, if you're in a good spot, you can be attacking with it. Otherwise, it's just kind of kill something and can block something smaller. You got Carnage Tyrant, which is just the absolute beast of this format right now. 6 mana, 7/6, can't be countered, trample, hexproof. It's good against everyone. The can't be countered is only relevant against control, but control is the 2nd most popular deck in the format right now, and that's not including decks like Is It Drakes, which also play counterspells, and Mono Blue, which also plays counterspells. And so the fact that you can just have a can't be countered creature main deck, and then the hexproof is just good against everyone. Everyone has to play kill spells in their deck. It's just an obvious strategy that you need. So the fact that this thing's got hexproof and it's a huge creature for just 6 mana, and you have ways in the deck to get it back, is just incredibly powerful. You got cast downs. Usually play about 2 of those. There's not a ton of legendary creatures that are in the format, but there are some. This deck doesn't really want to go super heavy into the instants and sorceries area, so that's kind of why it only plays 2. It's only 2 drops, so not bad, but it is a little specific with the non-legendary. And then you got Vraska's Contempt kind of for everything else for your planeswalkers and your other creatures that are legendary, or anything that needs to be exiled, like any of the Phoenixes. And then you got Find and Finality, also a very necessary card for this deck. You can obviously use Find to bring back those Carnage Tyrants, bring back those Explore cards if you need to find other stuff, or some Planeswalkers. It's only creature cards, so any other of those Explore creatures if you need to keep digging. You got Finality, which put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature, and then -4/-4 to all other creatures until the end of turn, which is incredible because if you just have like 1/3/3 creature that's explored or something, then you can just throw 2 counters on it, make it big, kill everything else in the battlefield, which is very good against decks like mono white, mono blue, and even the mirror match, just because you're going to be benefiting more likely than they are. And we already talked about Vraska's Contempt a little bit. Very good against Drakes, just because you want to be getting that Phoenix out of there. Also very good against Rekindling Phoenix, if just guys playing that in a sideboard or something for some reason to throw it in there. And getting the 2 life, just a little buff, a little bonus. Just a little upside. Not super useful. I guess it's good to counteract the damage that you'll be taking from that Midnight Reaper, but pretty solid stuff. Moving on to the Planeswalkers, this deck does typically play a lot of Planeswalkers. In the main deck, it's got 1 Karn, Scion of Urza. Just a little bit of card draw. You get extra cards in your hand. A lot of the stuff in your deck does the same thing. So the plus is like, if you get 2 non-land cards out of that, chances are that your opponent, there's no obvious pick. Like your opponent's going to be giving you like 1 of 2 Explore cards all of the time. And if it is a good obvious pick that they can take, just hand you a land or something, you always got the minus to just next turn get that good creature into your hand. And later in the game, if you're already in a winning position, or you're in a position where maybe you just board wiped and your opponent doesn't have doesn't have any creatures, you can just start minus, get those creatures on the battlefield. Vivian Reed, 3 of in this deck, pretty crucial. The plus lets you just take creatures or lands, put them into your hand. Usually you don't need a ton of land fixing. If you're already at 5, the highest it goes is 6 with Carnage Tyrant and with Vraska Relic Seer. So just kind of putting more cards into your hand, more creatures into your hands, so that you just have like an endless flow. Make sure you're not running out of gas. -3, artifacts and enchantments, destroying them is pretty useful, but usually not a huge deal. Destroying them, maybe like History Benalia, or Search for Escanta, that kind of stuff. But being able to destroy creatures with flying is a huge deal because this deck has no flying. -8 basically just wins you the game. Like if you can get to that point, that means that you have enough creatures to successfully block and protect your Vivian Reed, and this deck goes wide enough that giving your creatures +2/+2 vigilance, trample, and indestructible, that's just going to be game over. Your opponent's not going to be able to come back from that. You got 1 Vraska Golgari Queen. Personally, not a huge fan of this card. I don't think sacrificing permanents is ever super useful to you. In this deck, you do have a few useless things, like the Ravenous Chupacabra. You can easily sack one of those, or late game you could sack a Llanowar Elves easily and just be able to get that 1 extra life, draw a card, and try to find something better. Being able to destroy anything with converted mana cost 3 or less. At 4 mana, that's pretty decent. Just being able to kill a creature that's, it can protect itself, destroy a creature that's potentially could attack it, or if they don't have creature, it just kind of puts you ahead by destroying maybe their Search for Escanta or some other smaller enchantment. And then you got whenever your creature you control deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. That kind of just puts your opponent in a really awkward spot where they can no longer afford to be able to take small amounts of damage while still attacking you. They now have to block every single creature that you attack with, which means they have to have a lot more creatures than you in order to win the game, which is going to be very hard to do considering your deck plays a lot of creatures. Lastly, we got Vraska Relic Seeker, 6-drop, +2, create a 2/2 pirate creature token with Menace, which is very powerful. can also destroy an artifact, creature, and enchantment, and you get a treasure token. The treasure token is not super relevant, especially in only 2-color deck. But again, kind of like Vivian Reed, the fact that you can destroy any creature, that means getting rid of those flyers, getting rid of artifacts and enchantments. There's just a lot of main deck artifact and enchantment hate. So any deck that's relying on those is going to have a very tough time against you. And similar to Vraska Golgari Queen's ult, Relic Seeker's ult, target player's life total becomes 1, which again means that at any point you can just kill them, so they cannot afford to leave or to not leave black blockers. They now have to block every single thing that you do, or otherwise they're going to lose, unless they have a lot of life gain. Moving on to the sideboard, you got 1 card each Tyrant. If you're playing against that control deck, or any deck that has a lot of heavy removal, it's just a really powerful card. You can really easily throw one in rather than having a Vraska Relic Seeker, and it's just kind of like really scary threat end game. Another cast down, if you're playing against maybe like mono white or another deck that's playing semi-big creatures that you really need, there's specific ones that you need to get rid of. Deathgorger Scavenger, kind of like a somewhat worse Scavenging Ooze, and kind of has the same effect, where whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you can exile target creature from a graveyard. It doesn't have to be yours. If a creature is exiled this way, you gain 2 life, and if a non-creature exiled this way, it gets a +1/+1 counter. I really like this card against mono red, just being able to kill some other, if you kill some of their creatures, usually it doesn't seem like it's super valuable. If you cast down, they're like 2-drop, doesn't seem like it's that much of a win. But if now you can exile and gain 2 life, or exile their instants and sorcery spells, put counters on this, it's really going to slow them down, and now you're going to have a bigger blocker. 4 Duress really goes to show that this deck can have a hard time against decks like Jeskai Control, but having access to that 4 Duress in the sideboard is really going to disturb their game plan, being able to take their counter spells, their removal spells, all that. Golden Demise, 2 of, against decks really against like mono blue, mono white, where they're going wide or having a lot of small creatures, because you have more ways to get creatures back and to kind of like get more creatures than say mono blue does, because mono blue relies on like 1 or 2, or I should say like 3 creatures that are small to get in a lot of damage. So if you can kind of wipe those, then that works out really well, whereas normally like target removal is tough to do because they have a lot of ways to counter like targeted stuff and give creatures hexproof and that kind of stuff. And mono white is not going to be able to come back from a board wipe as well as you are. And so board wiping, even if it kills your own stuff, is going to benefit you in the long run against mono white. Another Karn Sign of Urza, just for a little more card draw. If you're going to, maybe in like a mirror match, if they're trying to, or any kind of like Grixis, like discarding kind of deck, just more ways to get more cards into your hand. Midnight Reaper, I really like this in a mirror match if you're having a lot of cards dying, because people, you're making even trades. Now Midnight Reaper just becomes that much more powerful, where you're drawing more cards than your opponent, and if you're both playing the same deck, then it's just going to work out really well for you. Plague Crafter, this I think is kind of just a sideboard card for Ravenous Chupacabra, in a case of maybe like an Is It Drake's deck, where you don't want to be paying 4 mana for a body to kill 1 creature if it's going to come back anyways, if they're relying on like 1 or 2 creatures the whole game. And so just kind of like a better version. And if they don't have any creatures, then being able to sacrifice or discard cards is very crucial also. So maybe putting that in against like a control deck who's not going to have any creatures anyways, just making them have less cards is going to be very useful to you. The Eldest Reborn, kind of same idea. Decks are going to have very little creatures, so if a control deck taps out to play 1 big creature, or they tap out for their Teferi with no backup, slamming this Eldest Reborn, forcing them to sacrifice that Teferi, and then making them discard cards later on, it's going to be really powerful. And then you got 1 Vraska's Contempt. Any deck that's playing a lot of Planeswalkers, or some big creatures that are bigger than yours, you can't handle them, or also very powerful against Is It Drakes, because you really need the exile to get rid of those Phoenixes. And lastly, this just got a big one just because I couldn't fit it on the page. You got Golgari Findbroker. Also a powerful card against control, because if you go play a 3-drop and they counter it, now the fact that you can get this 4 mana 3/4 body, which isn't bad, but it's kind of like small enough that they don't want to have to use a kill spell on it because it's nothing special, but it's still going to get in damage. And you can return any permanent card back from your graveyard to your hand, which means now they need another counter spell to counter that card that you just played again. And so yeah, just kind of useful tools against control, which a lot of this deck has, a sideboard is about. And yep, that's going to be it for this episode. Thanks for watching this Decknology. If you have any ideas of what decks you want me to talk about, leave it in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll come up with something. If you like what you see, feel free to subscribe, like the video, and we'll see you next time.